Welcome to Satsang. So beautiful to be together. Having my own ideologies and my own philosophies is resulting in conflict between me and my family members, parents, siblings, etc. How to lead a life with my own principles without creating problems for others? When should I compromise? And when should I be stubborn? So it's a great question because it's something that really anyone living in a family has ever had to face. Certainly anyone living in a traditional Indian family where even after growing up, they stay in a multi-generational household. Because it's one thing to have a household that's just parents and children who then grow up and leave the house when they go off to university. But it's a completely other thing to have a household in which you've got adult children who are not children anymore, but they're the children of the older generation. Their marriage, their relationship, maybe then even their children. It's very frequent, and especially more so these days, that you start to see these sorts of clashes. In the past, I think the majority of people just really followed in their parents' footsteps. There was an element of the culture that was just, you do what you're told to do. This is our culture, this is how we do things. Yahi theek hai, woh theek nahi hai. This is right, that's not right. Why? Because I said so. And that was really enough for most people at that time. It's one of the things that we see so frequently in struggles now because the parents say, my God, I never would have spoken to my parents like that. Mere mein kabhi aise himmat nahi tha. I never had that courage, that strength, or even you could say that rudeness to talk to my parents like that. And they think that their children are being rude because when they were young, it would have been seen as rude to talk to their parents like that, to question. But what's happened just in really a couple of decades, barely even, really sort of one generation, we're now just at the beginning of the next generation of it. Really in one generation, what we've seen in India is a shift where the younger generation, due to a lot of reasons, I won't go into all of the sociology of it, but whether it's the type of education they're getting, whether it's the impact of the internet, social media, TV, movies, there's now so many more options and possibilities of how to live and also how to think. few decades ago, in most villages of India, you knew that which you were raised with. The idea of having a different worldview was never something that ever would have occurred to anyone. But now, with so much information and exposure and other ideas and other opinions coming in, and in educational styles where children are now being encouraged to be creative thinkers, well, suddenly we have now a generation of youngsters who have different ideas. And I actually think it's great. I fully support it. I think what every generation needs is young people who are dedicating themselves to thinking about what their priorities are, what their ethics are, what their life path may be. I don't think that robots are going to benefit our society in any way other than the way that we're already using artificial intelligence. I mean, it's great to have, autopilot on a plane if, God forbid, something happened to the pilot. But as far as living, breathing people, we want people to be thinkers, not just robots. And we want people to have the courage to say, God, I know you think like this, and I really respect that, and I love you, and I respect you, but it's not how I think. I know for me, when I first came to India, and I had this incredibly powerful experience of transformation and awakening, and I decided that I was meant to be here. I wanted to live here. And I remember talking to my parents. And I remember saying to them, I actually put it in a letter first, because I knew it was going to go over a lot better if they had time to digest it and have their reaction before I was standing in front of them. But I said, I love you, and I respect you. And I know that your lives really work for you. And that's great. That makes me so happy. But I don't actually want to be you. I remember my mom was 52 at that time. And I remember saying in the letter, if you told me today, I was 25, if you told me today that at 52, I was going to be where you are, that would make me miserable. It doesn't mean I don't respect you. It doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean I don't think that it's great for you. But I would rather end my life now. That's not where I want to go. And I said, if I get on the same train that you got on, it's going to take me to the same destination. And the only person I've ever encountered in the life that I had lived who is in a place where I would like to be is Pujya Swamiji. And I know, of course, it's very, very, very unlikely I'm going to get there in this lifetime, but at least I can look at him and say, that's where I want to go. Meaning that's the train I have to get on. And that, it didn't go over very well. It was good that I had put it in a letter first to give them a few days to have the very natural reaction. But I think this is something that on a lot of levels, a lot of people are realizing, which is, I love my family members, but I don't actually want to live the way they're living. what they've dedicated their lives to, the choices they've made. I respect it, I honor it. But they're not the choices I want to make. They're not my priorities. And therefore I need to make different choices. And we're seeing this, clashing of the tectonic plates of societies. And when it happens with the plates of the earth, we get earthquakes. But sometimes you get the Himalayas. Right? Sometimes when two plates rub against each other and hit in a certain way, we get a devastating earthquake. But sometimes you get a mountain range. And I'm all in favor of people having the courage to really live their path. And we have to realize that we also live in relationship. Parents, spouses, friends, office places. And what that means is that we have to be really clear in our own mind of which things are simply preferences or which things are simply an opinion versus which things are really core to who we are. Because you don't necessarily have to fight for your opinion all the time. Sometimes it's actually really beautiful to just let things go. Right? Whether it's what type of restaurant we're going to eat at, whether it's what movie we're going to see. Sometimes in relationship, it's just easier to not always have to put your foot down. It certainly makes the relationships flow a lot more smoothly. And so it's important to figure out which are the things that really matter to me, that are core to who I am, my being, my principles, my ethics, my values, my dharma. And which is it that I just, I prefer Thai to Chinese. But is it really worth fighting over? Like, all right, how frequently do we go out? Once every couple weeks, can I eat Chinese and be happy? Sure. Can eat Thai on my own or with friends. Like, who cares? Just go for Chinese with the family. Smile. Be fine about it. It's worth it. The end result of the joy and the peace of being together for a family meal far outweighs the fact that you're going to enjoy a Thai dish more than a Chinese dish. But when it comes to your real principles, I think it's important to have that courage to live them. But here's the key. Your dharma may be to live it, but your dharma is not to shove it down someone else's throat. And what happens with a lot of us is, if my principles are different, my way of seeing things are different, not only do I look and find the courage to live that, but I also seem to decide that that gives me the right, or even the duty, God forbid, to be the moral police, to suddenly be your guru, self-appointed, and to convince you that my way is right. And that's where you get a lot of conflict. So live your principles. If you're in a family, in a relationship with people who really love you, and themselves are not too stuck, too much living in ignorance, too attached to their egos. I mean, if there's just even a a flicker of spirituality in them, they're going to be able to hear you, assuming that you present it humbly. What most of us do is we say, I don't agree with you, and here's what I think, and here's why I'm right, and this is why I'm going to do it, and you should listen. Well, that whole energy is actually very offensive. And when you come at someone offensively, naturally they become defensive. It's just the energetic flow. And so you almost never get the results that you want. Instead, can you be humble? Can you realize that just because something is your principle doesn't mean that you are objectively right and everyone else is wrong? So can you sit down the people you're having this conflict with, humbly, lovingly, and explain to them why this is important to you, why you want to live like that, without trying to convince them that you're somehow better? And I think what you'll find is, in most cases, it'll go over. It may not be easy, but assuming that it's not every small thing and people don't start to feel like you're on this high horse and you're picking at them, everything, and judging them, if they really love you, they'll come around. I remember when I decided to become a vegetarian. I was 15 in a family of non-vegetarians. And I came home and announced to my parents that I was a vegetarian. And my mom handled it brilliantly, actually, really brilliantly. She said, okay. She said, until and unless some doctor tells me that you are malnourished, you can eat whatever you want. Until and unless some doctor says that you are malnourished. If you are going to take charge, you have to take charge and make sure that you stay healthy. And she said, don't expect me to be your advocate. She said, when we go to people's houses, or we go out to a restaurant with friends or family, and people want to know why you're vegetarian and they pressure you, she said, don't look to me to come in and be your advocate and save the day. She said, you're on your own. You want to make this choice? You will do your research. You will figure out what to say to these people. Because don't come crying to me that people are trying to change you. If you're going to take this decision, take it strongly and stand up for yourself. And it was a fantastic lesson because I had become a visceral vegetarian. I didn't know why I was a vegetarian except that suddenly meat no longer was food. Suddenly I looked at it on a plate and it was no more food to me than the plate was food or that the table was food. But when she sent me to do the research, then I learned all of the amazing reasons why we should be vegetarian. So present it lovingly, humbly, and then stand your ground. Ultimately, your dharma is to find your path, not to be a robot, not to walk in somebody else's pre-made footsteps, not to just toe the status quo, but to use your mind, your heart, your intuition, your guidance to chart your own path. And when people love you, they will support you in that. Any questions? Here, anyone? Yes.
Good evening. My name is Ola. We have a philosophy of yoga lessons, and it was told to us not to let emotions and feelings to control your life. And it's difficult for me to understand how to not to let it happen. Because emotions, it's like you enter in the water and there is a wave coming and you're already like there, so you can't do nothing. So.
Great. The waves of emotion. What do we do? How do we not let them run our life? So let's stay with your metaphor of the waves in the ocean. Imagine this. You walk into the water, you're in the water, and suddenly this huge wave comes. What do you do? What do you do in the ocean when a big wave comes? Well, you can't get out of the way. I mean, you can try, but every moment I've ever spent in the ocean, you never are able to successfully outrun a wave. By the time it's upon you, if you're actually in the water, I mean, if you're on the shore or you're only up to this much, then yes. But if you're actually in the water and a wave is coming, by the time it's there, you'd have to have a surfboard to get out of the water faster than that wave. So what do? When the wave comes, think about it. Those of you who spend time in the ocean swimming, a big wave is coming. You can't run away. You can't avoid it. What do? You go under the wave, right? We dive down. The wave comes, we dive down. The beginning swimmers always try to get out of the way. And of course, what every one of them finds is themselves face down in the sand, under the water with the wave on top of them, and they've got a mouthful of sand because it doesn't work. So what you do is you dive under the water. You go one way, the wave comes the other way, and then you come back up, right? Now, imagine that wave were anger instead of a wave in the ocean. Well, it's the same thing. We dive down, meaning we dive deeply into ourselves when the waves of emotion come. Don't try to outrun them. It's the time to sit down, close your eyes, bring the awareness to your breath. The emotion is in the neurons of your brain. That's where it lives. The longer it lives there, the more impact it's going to have on your body. It's going to send signals to your adrenal glands. They'll secrete different hormones. But the actual emotion begins and lives in your brain. You see something, you hear something, you think about something, you read something. There has been a stimulus that has entered your brain that has made you angry. At that exact moment, you dive deep. And you just sit down. Don't try to analyze it. Don't try to push it away. Don't try to say, don't be angry, don't be angry. Because all that does is fill your mind with angry, 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 angry. Just simply drop deeply into the breath, into your mantra. And what you'll find is, like the wave in the ocean, it peaks, it comes, it peaks, you feel that energy, and then it crashes and it dissipates. It only lasts if you hook yourself into it. If you start telling yourself stories about it. We rehearse that anger, then it lasts. But if you actually just sit and allow it to rise and then fall while you're anchored in your breath, it'll just do what a wave in the ocean does. It comes and it crashes and then it goes. And that's the best way. The other way that we sometimes deal with waves, assuming that you're deep out into the ocean and you're not right where the waves are crashing, is you can also just kind of ride it up and down, right? You just allow the wave to sort of pick you up and then it drops you down. And that's another technique with waves of emotions as well. And that's a practice of just awareness and mindfulness. So suddenly that wave is coming. And instead of the choice to dive deeply, you may decide sometimes just to greet it with awareness. Okay, here we are. Here we are. Blood is boiling. Look at that. Heart rate is racing. Look at that. Look at the flood of all these thoughts coming into my mind. Look at how my vision is narrowing. And we just kind of ride it as a witness. The same way that you ride a gentle wave when you're kind of far out in the ocean. They just come and they go. You just notice that, anger. All right. Wasn't expecting to see you today. There you are. I don't have a lot of time, but let's just bring some awareness to you for a while. Yeah, I notice you're here. All right. But again, you don't hook yourself into it. There's no stories. There's no drama. There's no action coming out of it. It's not a matter of planning my revenge. What keeps you stuck in the emotions is the games of the mind. I'm hurt. I'm jealous. I'm angry. The mind just feeds on that and it starts telling us story after story, making it worse. So the main thing to do is just make sure that your mind is not telling stories. Whether it's in the awareness of your breath, with the mantra, or just the mindfulness of noticing the wave of the emotion. Either way. But you're not telling stories. And then lastly, in terms of not letting it dictate your life or your behavior. Well, this is that beautiful teaching that Pujya Swamiji speaks about a lot in terms of grabbing the space between a thought and an action. So I have a thought of anger, and maybe the thought even says, I'll show him. Who the hell does he think he is? I'll teach him a lesson. Well, that's just a thought. It hasn't actually yet ruined my life. It only ruins my life when that thought actually becomes an action. When I actually start plotting and planning the lesson I'm going to teach him. And so one of the great benefits of yoga is it enables us to slow down enough in our mind through a practice of meditation, through a practice of pranayama, through a practice of asana. It enables us to slow down enough in the mind that we're able to notice that thought and say, wow, look at that. And that's when we take a nice walk in nature, or we listen to some beautiful music. We call up a good friend for a cup of tea. We go to a yoga class. We watch something inspiring on YouTube. We do whatever it is that brings us back to ourself. Because that plotting, planning, I'm about to ruin your life mental state isn't really you. And so you do whatever you need to do to bring you back to you before you engage in an action. And that takes practice, because most of us, it's like there is no space there. But there is, we just don't notice it or grab it. So slowly, slowly, slowly you develop that ability to grab the space. Other questions? Yes.
Pranam Sadhviji.
Pranam.
How can we minimize our carbon footprint?
Great. How do we minimize our carbon footprint? Whether we're thinking about a cosmic, karmic footprint or a carbon footprint, either way, the core answer is actually the same. Conscious living. When I'm not living consciously, my karmic bank account is just growing and growing and growing and growing, and I'm going to have to keep coming back until that thing gets emptied. And when I'm not living consciously, my carbon footprint also keeps growing. Because then I become a slave to the way that our misguided economy runs. We forget that the first part of economy is eco. And that actually our economies should be being run in a way that's in alignment with ecology and in alignment with the earth. But sadly, they're not. The way that capitalism and laws of, supply and demand and free market have created a societal system in which my personal goals are exactly contrary to what's good for the earth. The more I let things be, the less I touch, the less I pollute, the less I change the earth, the less money I make. In order to make money, I've got to produce things. Well, the things I produce take resources. Whether it's a matter of the cows who are dying to give us leather, whether it's a matter of the rainforests that are being cut down to graze the cattle who give us hamburgers, whether it's a matter of the forests all over that are cut down to put in factories to give us everything we buy. And those factories then that spew their waste into the air, into the soil, into the water. But it's all us being pawns in the hands of this economy in which we are being goaded, tricked in many ways. Our mental faculties are actually being, hijacked. in order to convince us to buy what somebody's selling. The way to shift that karmic and carbon footprint is through consciousness. Now, there's two aspects of consciousness here. Consciousness number one, of actually, what do I need? And what am I shopping for? So am I actually going out for a new pair of shoes because I really need a new pair of shoes? Or am I feeling really kind of ugly these days and not so happy with myself, and maybe I put on a few unwanted pounds, or I lost a few pounds I didn't want to lose, and I'm feeling not so attractive in my body. And so I've decided that a new pair of shoes is going to make me feel much more attractive. So I'm shopping not for shoes. I'm shopping for self-worth. I'm shopping for self-love. I'm shopping for self-acceptance. If you look at the overwhelming majority of items that fill our closets, they're there not because it's winter, we were cold, so we needed a sweater. But they're there because I was bored, I was frustrated, I was depressed, and so I had some shopping therapy. Or they are there because I was so unconscious that as I was scrolling online, I had tuned out so completely and had become literally just a catatonic scroller that when I saw the button that said buy now, I pushed it in that state of catatonia without even knowing really what I was doing. I mean, and of course we all laugh because we've all done that at some point. And you realize afterwards, like, what was that about? How in the world, like, why in the world, what was I thinking? And you realize, well, I wasn't thinking. I wasn't thinking at all. My brain was completely off. I remember one of my favorite facts from my days studying neurology, which was that we burn fewer calories watching TV than sleeping. Now, the reason that that's such a great fact is in both cases, the body is still, you're not moving. Now, in sleeping, you're lying down. You don't even have to use any muscles. You would think that holding yourself up in some way to watch TV would cause you to burn at least infinitesimally more calories. But the truth is, it all has to do with activity in the brain. The brain is the greatest use of our calories, not the body. Your brain is more active in sleep than when you watch TV. So even though the body is using a few extra muscles to actually keep you sitting up and occasionally reaching for a sip of your Coke or a handful of potato chips, the brain is using so much less energy that the sum total of the calories you burn watching TV is less than sleeping. Now, my instinct is, I haven't seen recent statistics, but my instinct is that scrolling social media is certainly just as bad, if not actually worse, than watching TV. Because when you're watching TV, at least on some level, you have to pay attention. There's a storyline. People are saying things. It's a drama, it's a sitcom, it's whatever you're watching. You have to pay some kind of attention to what this one's saying and that one's saying. Whereas on social media, you don't even actually really pay attention. So my guess would be that our brain is so asleep that we are burning less calories than not only when we sleep, but then also when we watch TV. And I mention that because it means our brains are off. And at least while you watch TV, you're not spending money. Unless you're watching those like home shopping network things, but mostly you're not spending money. But now on social media, with all the advertisements, it's become click here, click here, click here. So we're constantly consuming in that state of catatonia. And so when I say be conscious, it means A, conscious of what am I buying, like what do I need? But B, it means quite literally, make sure you are awake before you buy. You know, I mean, count down from 100 to 0, subtracting 3s before you buy anything online. Like, make sure that your brain wakes up. Do some multiplication tables. Do something to at least wake up your brain before you click here. The second part of being conscious, though, is the consciousness of actually the cost of the item. Most of us pay attention only to what's written on the price tag, but we don't pay attention to the actual cost upon the earth of that item. And that's a huge impact on our karmic footprint and our carbon footprint. Because there's a lot of items that are really cheap because they've been produced in sweatshops by women and children working in horrendous conditions. Because that factory cuts corners and doesn't treat its waste. There's a huge ripple impact. And so if you want to really be careful of both of these footprints, you've got to become a conscious consumer. The first and easiest and non-negotiable step, really, is buy organic, buy fair trade. Whether it's food, whether it's clothing, buy recycled. Okay, not recycled food, but there's a lot else. Clothing, everything we buy can be bought. I mean, these days, the fashion industry is phenomenal. They're doing incredible things with recycled, not only recycled fabrics, but recycled bottle caps, recycled everything. I mean, when I was a teenager, so we're going back 35 years, I used to have a pair of cowboy boots. You know, the look was jeans and cowboy boots. And I had a pair of cowboy boots that were made from recycled tires. So instead of being leather, they were this hard rubber. They looked like leather. They looked like full-on fashionable cowboy boots. But they were actually made from recycled tires. Now, in 35 years, the fashion industry has come in incredible leaps and bounds. It's in the last 25 years, I haven't, bought any fashion, so I couldn't give you the details of all of what they're able to do. But I know enough people in the fashion industry who are doing amazing work. I've been at enough events around sustainable development where there are speakers from the world of fashion. So whatever you buy, organic, fair trade, recycled wherever possible, And then do some research. Again, when I was growing up, so we're going back 35, even 40 years, when I was young, really young, I remember that PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, used to put out a catalog. And in those days, you had to actually send them a postcard, and they would send you a catalog. And I remember sending away for my first catalog. Maybe I was 11 or 12. Because I had heard somewhere that the shampoo and conditioner and soap on my face that I used, that they were tested on bunny rabbits, and that they were rubbed into bunny rabbits' eyes and tested on animals, tested on their skin to burn their skin. And PETA put out a catalog that, again, in the days without any internet, without any computers, without any of that, put out a catalog of all of the major brands of everything you needed to buy. I was never much of a makeup wearer, but they had all of the different cosmetics, everything, and all the different brands. And then they would rate them based on, were there animal products in it? Were they tested on animals? Were they made in the rainforests by cutting down or otherwise harming the rainforest? I forget all of the different, ways, but these days, 35, 40 years later, I am sure that in 10 minutes on Google, you could come up with all of the research you needed of the companies that you could buy everything that you actually need to buy from, who are eco-friendly, who are sustainable, who are organic, who are fair trade, who are recycling. I mean, there's just no excuse anymore for unconscious consumption. We have all of the information at our fingertips. Amazon will deliver whatever you want. I mean, again, in and of itself, not a great environmental alternative. But the point is, it's accessible. Yes, if you can buy it in your local store, nothing like it. But everything is now available. And so all we have to do really is commit that we're going to be conscious. What we eat, what we wear, what we buy, how we live. And then slowly, 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 our carbon footprint gets a lot less. And along with it, beautifully, your karmic footprint gets less. And so it serves you on your karmic journey, and it serves the earth. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Yes. Last.
Pranam. I'm happy that I'm here. About 20 years ago, when I was a student, I left home twice to become...
Is your microphone not on, by the way, maybe? Oh.
I left my home twice to become a saint because I knew that I had nothing to worry about with respect to family matters.
संदीप जी, उनको जरा माइक के साथ थोड़ा सा हेल्प कर देना ना, वो पकड़ लेंगे.
20 years ago, when I was a student, I left 2 times my home to become a saint. And I went to the Himalayas, came here, and many other places. But ultimately, I ended up doing my education and living family life or worldly life. So after 20 years ago, now, later, I'm wondering what God really wants. Because these 20 years only, I had suffering from all directions. So why don't give me a chance to become what I wanted to become that time?
So, if you made this decision 20 years ago, and now you're in a family situation. Presumably you have children? Do you have children? You're single. Acha, so you just lived a normal career life, but you didn't get married. Okay. Okay.
And everything, like doing education. I'm an IT software engineer. But after 20 years, I realized that this is not the life I wanted to have.
Okay. So what's stopping you from coming back and living a spiritual life?
Only one thing. 20 years ago, I had nothing to lose. Now, after 20 years later, I have to take care of family members. I have to, if you are making progress, you cannot afford to go downwards.
Okay. So, first of all, your responsibility to family may not have been there in that way 20 years ago because they didn't need so much 20 years ago. But do not think that if you had left them 20 years ago, that you wouldn't be responsible to them today. That responsibility is there. So don't think that you would be freed of that responsibility just because you had left. If they needed you now, you would still be responsible to them now. If what you're finding is there's nothing but suffering, then the question that I would ask you is, you don't have anything to lose now. At that time, 20 years ago, maybe what you had to lose was the idea that you could become something. I mean, there was at least some level of you that thought, Chalo, I'll get a good education, I'll have a good job, I'll be successful. Now you don't even have that to lose because now you've seen it all. Now you've seen it, you've done it, you've achieved, you've succeeded, you've earned. So now I would say you've got less to lose on a personal level. And if what you're finding is there's nothing but suffering in that life, then what you need to do is figure out a way to be responsible to your dharma, to your family, while simultaneously being responsible to your dharma to yourself, which is to walk the spiritual path. Responsibility to parents, unless they are bedridden, in the very end stages of life when they can't do anything for themselves, until and unless they reach that point, being responsible to them does not mean being there at their beck and call every minute of every day, doing exactly what they want all the time. That's not the dharma of responsibility to parents. The dharma is when they need you to take care of them, you will. Like they took care of you when you needed that, when you couldn't take care of yourself. You needed to be fed, you needed to be changed, you needed to be cared for. They did that. And when they need that, the dharma is you do that. Unless you've got siblings who are doing it. But it's the responsibility of the children to look after our parents in that way. But that doesn't mean that in all of the years prior to that you simply do everything they say, what they want, because they've convinced you somehow that that's your responsibility. Parents always have agendas. They always have ideas of how we're going to live our lives. I mean, parents are human. They're beautiful humans, and they're each in their own way. Yeah, they're fallible, they make mistakes, but they're all doing the very best that they can with whatever the toolbox that they have is. But they're human. And so when their children, are born, they've got this whole concept of what it's going to be like, what we're going to be like, how they're going to groom us, what we're going to become, what we're going to do, how we're going to fulfill all of those dreams that they couldn't fulfill for themselves. It is not worth repeating, not any of your responsibility to fulfill the emotional agenda that your parents created in their own well-intentioned, love-filled, but nonetheless wrapped in illusion, wrapped in confusion, wrapped in ego agenda of what your life was going to be like. That's not why we take birth. The purpose of human life is not thou shalt fulfill thy parents' agenda. So what you need to do is find a balance between fulfilling what is your dharma, which is making sure that their needs are met, making sure that they are taken care of, making sure that they are looked after, but simultaneously recognizing that you have a dharma that is not be their puppet. And if your dharma is pulling you onto a spiritual path and it's been pulling you there for 20 years, now would be the right time. I mean, there's a reason you didn't get married and have kids. It would be a lot more difficult to make that decision now if you had. But it's like you've been preparing your whole life knowing that you were going to walk this path. Now is the time to have the courage to walk it. And they will adjust in the same way that parents throughout the millennia have adjusted to their children walking their own path. There's a beautiful, beautiful poem by Khalil Gibran, who's one of my favorite poets. And it's called On Children. And you should read it because it's a poem written to parents telling them how to be good parents. And the gist of the poem, I hate trying to quote him because I always get it wrong and he's so beautiful. But the gist is, they come through you, but they are not of you. They do not belong to you. They belong to life. They belong to the movement, the flow of life. And there's a beautiful line that says, you may try to become like them, but do not try to make them like you. Find that poem. Go and Google that poem because it's a beautiful teaching on actually what a parental role is supposed to be. And it's beneficial for parents as well as children, because as parents we can learn. And as children we're able to understand, oh yeah. Because we also understand our role in the poem. But the gist really is, it is not right for them to paralyze you. And it is not your role or your duty or your dharma to be paralyzed by them. And so if they're not going to be prepared to break this dysfunctional situation, well, then you have to be prepared to do it. Not in a way that hurts them, obviously, and as much love and respect as you can. They've given you everything. But that doesn't mean they're your jailers. You have a responsibility to your own dharma as well.
I have seen your videos, you take care of your mother, and I love them. And my mother is also here, eating in the restaurant there.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, I came here only, even without knowing there could be some place like this. I met a Baba here. He said to me, by my nickname, Gopal, it's not your time. Go to Badrinath. Badrinath is calling you. I didn't know where Badrinath is. Shiva is there or Vishnu is there, I didn't know. I went there. I came back. He told me, you go back to your home and your time will come. I'm still waiting.
Abhagya Same.
And my father left 7 years ago. So I feel very obliged that I have to be there with mom all the time. I have family, sister, brother, everybody, but family drama happens. So I think I'm just waiting that, yes, my mother is there, so I have to be there.
Okay, well, bring your mom here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to do that. And by the way, walking a spiritual path doesn't mean that you have to change where you live. There's no rule whatsoever that says you cannot live in the home with your mother and live a spiritual life. That's not what I'm saying at all. Many, many, many spiritual people have lived and taken care of their parents. It's a beautiful seva. I'm talking about how you spend your time and your energy. You can walk a spiritual path being at home, keeping mom company. And it sounds like that's exactly where you're physically supposed to be right now. But now is the time for you to be focusing on your spiritual path. And you know what? It'll be good for mom also. Because the more on a spiritual path you're walking, the more it'll bring her on that path. You can walk that path together. Beautiful. Have a wonderful rest of your evening in this beautiful, amazing, windy monsoon, glorious weather on the banks of Ganga. A beautiful morning and day to our family joining us from all over the world. And I look so forward to being together with you all tomorrow. And so much love.